Dear listeners, welcome to a webinar/podcast of the Mitigation Action Facility, developed as a support tool for applicants that are currently working on their project outlines. As a part of this webinar, we will offer applicants some additional guidance on a few annexes supplementing a project outline. We'll strive to focus your attention on the most essential pieces of data and information that should be provided for an outline to score high in the assessment process. The webinar covers the following annexes: Annex 2, Logframe, Annex 4B, the DPP Budget, Annex 5A and 5B, Business Case and Financial Mechanism. For guidance on Annex 6, Mitigation Potential, please refer to a separate podcast on the website of the Mitigation Action Facility. With that, let's start and take a look at Annex 2, Logframe. Annex 2 is required by the Mitigation Action Facility as it helps to present the summary of your project and the logic behind in a standardized format. Having a tabular structure, it allows you to show your project's overall scope, including impact, outcomes, and outputs, as well as provides a framework for the monitoring the project results if and once it enters the implementation phase. To better prepare this annex, we recommend you to review thoroughly the M&E Framework 2023 of the Mitigation Action Facility with specific sections listed here. There is a handful of guidance and instructions on how to develop a log frame, on key log frame components and requirements with regard to specific indicators, sources of verification, assumptions, and risks. One important thing you should pay attention to is that the log frame must be consistent with your project's theory of change. The theory of change is expected to be elaborated in detail during the detailed preparation phase, or DPP. Log frame template. On this slide, we will show you the simplified log frame template used by the Mitigation Action Facility as one of the annexes to the project outline. For a detailed template, please refer to the full Annex 2. As a commonly used log frame template, this matrix consists of 4 columns, namely results, indicators, sources of verification, and assumptions/risks. Column 1. This column outlines the design or internal logic of a project. It incorporates a hierarchy of what the project will do, activities and outputs, and what it will seek to achieve, impact and outcome. Column 2. This column outlines how the results will be monitored and evaluated by providing indicators used to measure whether or not various elements of the project design or its internal logic have materialized as planned. And column 3. This column specifies the sources of information and the means of verification for assessing the indicators. Finally, column 4. This column outlines the external assumptions and risks related to each level of the internal logic of the project. Assumptions and risks define conditions that are necessary for next level of the project's internal logic to occur, i.e., to ensure that activities result in outputs. Outputs lead to outcome or outcomes, while these allow the project's impact to materialize. In the next slides, we'll go over the details of a log frame. Slide 3, impact. One effective way to design your project is to start from the highest level and work downwards, meaning you can start from impact and continue with outcome, output, and activities, which is exactly the sequence of the log frame template. To begin with, you select the first row, which is the description of impact, as well as the indicators to monitor the impact of your project. In short, the impact represents the overall goal that the project aims to achieve. To develop a sound and sensible impact description, there are some guiding questions for you to take in consideration, such as, what is your goal? What do you hope will change as a result of your project? Besides the description of your project's impact, you should come up with some SMART, which means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound indicators to monitor the impact. The indicators should have a baseline and a target value, meaning value before the start of the project and at the end of the project. It is recommended to develop indicators related to the target sector as impact indicators. Please be mindful that impact presents an overarching goal of the project, thus will also encompass variables and factors that are beyond the direct influence of your project. Slide 4, Outcome. This slide shows the overall requirement for outcome, including outcome description in the first column and details on respective indicators in the second column. Outcome describes a project's objective and articulates the expected change in beneficiary behavior, socio-economic or political system or institutional performance. To measure the success of outcome, performance indicators have to be developed and monitored. At the Mitigation Action Facility, we define 5 mandatory core indicators, the so-called M indicators, to measure the outcome achievement across the entire portfolio. It is worth noting that those M indicators are cumulative and baseline should be 0. Details on M indicators will be provided on the next slides. Besides this, projects may come up with other outcome indicators such as project and sector-specific indicators. Project implementers are encouraged to develop 1 to 2 such indicators at impact and/or outcome level that align with their goals and contribute to the partner country's relevant policy and sector context. At an outcome level, you are also expected to define 1 indicator on gender. Slide 5, M1 indicator. Let's zoom in on the 5 mandatory core indicators starting with M1, reduced greenhouse gas emissions. This is one of the most important indicators of the facility, showing the climate change mitigation impact of our investments. In this indicator, projects are expected to define a specific target value in TCO2e cumulative at the end of a project and target value for 10 years after the end of a project. It should be noted that the value required here is direct greenhouse gas emission reductions. For a definition of direct/indirect greenhouse gas emission reductions, please refer to the Annex 8.1 of the M&E Framework 2023. We also recommend you to review the mitigation guidelines published on the website of the Mitigation Action Facility to come up with a plausible and feasible set of mitigation calculations. A conservative approach is highly appreciated and also recommended. Slide 6, the M2 indicator. In this slide, we're talking about the M2, number of people directly benefiting from the project. In this indicator, we only count the number of people who are directly and intentionally targeted by the project and therefore benefit from project activities. For details, please refer to Annex 8.2 of the M&E Framework. Additionally, as a requirement related to gender equality and social inclusion, the so-called GESI, projects have to differentiate their direct and targeted beneficiaries by gender, specifically female, male, and diverse. The latter means individuals that identify as other, including, but not limited to, non-binary, transgender, gender fluid, or agender. To appropriately measure this indicator, projects are requested to provide baseline and target value. Regarding the measurement, double counting should be avoided. Slide 7, M3 indicator. Another M indicator, which is considered to be slightly trickier in comparison to other M indicators, the so-called M3 indicator, the degree to which the supported activities are likely to catalyze impact beyond the project, or in other words, potential for transformational change. Different from other M indicators, which are quantitative, this indicator is qualitative in nature, and we are applying a standard ranking level from 0 to 4 to assess the potential for transformational change of a proposed project. When approaching this indicator, firstly, a project should develop a few specific sub-indicators aiming at transformational change. It is required to develop at least 2 M3 sub-indicators per project. Each M3 sub-indicator should be linked to or be relevant for one of the 6 result categories of transformational change defined by the Mitigation Action Facility. Please review the Annex 8.3 of the M&E framework for the methodology of this indicator development and measurement. Slide 8, M4 and M5 indicators. The last 2 mandatory core indicators are related to climate finance mobilization. These 2 indicators aim at measuring the leverage potential from public sources, M4, and private sources, M5, of financing resulting from the project. It is essential to note that they are 2 separate indicators and aggregating them is not allowed. First, it is crucial to identify the public and private entities from which the funding is expected to be mobilized. For this purpose, in our M&E framework, Annex 8.4 provides a specific definition based on OECD source. It is recommended to take a look at this annex. Secondly, one of the key characteristics in the definition of M4 and M5 indicators is mobilized finance, which is different from catalyzed finance. In short, mobilized finance means the funds, public or private, that are directly linked or leveraged through the financial mechanism of your project. Since to other M indicators, for this indicator, we also require a baseline value and a target value, which should be provided in euro. Slide 9, output and activities. The last section of the Logframe's result hierarchy is outputs, including output indicators and activities. Outputs are the tangible results and services delivered to beneficiaries. Outputs are generated by using and transforming inputs through project activities. It is recommended that there are no more than 3 individual indicators per output. Moreover, a new requirement of the Mitigation Action Facility, according to the Gender Action Plan, is that projects are required to include 1 objective on gender equality, preferably at the outcome level, and define at least 1 corresponding indicator. Slide 10. In the last 2 columns of the Logframe template, it is necessary to provide information on means of verification or source of verification, as well as assumptions and risks of your project. The means of verification specify the sources of information that demonstrate the project's accomplishments. They are the types of data that need to be collected to verify the actual achievement of an indicator. Assumptions in the Logframe refer to the conditions or events beyond the project's control that are necessary for a project to succeed. Risks and uncertainties should be mentioned too. Bear in mind that a lower degree of risks strengthens the project's feasibility. Details regarding the risk identification and definition of assumptions could be found in the M&E Framework 2023. We recommend you to review the document carefully before filling in the Logframe. Thank you for your attention. The next annex that we will cover is Annex 4B, DPP Budget. Annex 4B, DPP Budget. The DPP Budget is an important annex since, if your project is selected for a detailed preparation phase or DPP, it will guide your expenditures. This annex will become part of the contractual agreement between you as an applicant and the grant agent of the Mitigation Action Facility, so-called FGA, a role played by the German Bilateral Development Agency, GIZ. The budget is structured along the major budget lines and foresees a possibility to forward funds to sub-grantees. There is no upper limit in terms of a DPP budget that can be requested, However, large budgets could be an indicator that a project is not reaching a sufficient level of readiness for implementation due to the significant amount of preparatory work still required. Slide 2. Before you start a project, you have to plan how much funds you will need in order to cover all the costs linked to the project over a specific period of time. In this case, over the duration of your DPP, which can be either 10 months or 15 months. Bear in mind that funding provided by the Mitigation Action Facility is public funding. Therefore, we would encourage you to adhere to the principles of a sound financial management when defining the budget for your DPP. The principles are as follows. Efficiency. Best value has been obtained for the money spent. Economy. For a specific activity, the minimum necessary amount of funds have been used. Effectiveness. The activities and objectives of the program have been met. The expenditures are to be considered eligible under the following: that they are identifiable, real expenditure backed by supporting documents according to accounting practices of the applicant, ASP, and applicable fiscal and social legislation, and that they are time-specific. Costs have incurred during the execution of the project, its DPP, and are based on the contractual regulations. Slide 3. When approaching Annex 4B, there are 3 steps to follow. Firstly, calculate all direct costs following the structure of the budget template. Direct costs are costs that can be directly causally attributed to the project and its activities and include, but are not limited to, the staff costs of an applicant, procurement costs, and travel costs for staff. It is essential that all these costs are causally linked to the project and particularly are necessary for the detailed preparation of the project. Secondly, define administrative costs that can be charged as a fixed percentage from the total sum of direct costs. We cannot disclose the estimated range of acceptable administrative costs, but can indicate that these shall be reasonable and will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If issues are identified, FGA will be in contact with the applicant to determine or negotiate a suitable solution. As a third step, please prepare separate budgets for any institutions that you plan to forward funding to during DPP. You'll see that respective budget sheets are a part of the Annex 4B. The institutions that you will forward funds to will serve as sub-grantees and will use the funding of the Mitigation Action Facility to fulfill their specific role in the detailed preparation of your project. Please note that sub-grantees are responsible for the accounting of the funds received under the same principles as the main recipient, meaning you as an applicant. Slide 4 and 5. On the next 2 slides, I will explain the details for each budget line. Number 1, staff costs. For personnel employed by the applicant/ASP. Actual gross salaries for various categories of staff assigned to the project, including social security charges and other remuneration-related costs. These costs may not exceed those borne by the applicant/ASP. Supporting documents include contracts, timesheets, and salary statements, broken down into gross salary, social security charges, insurances, and net salary. Staff costs of part-time employees must be calculated with a fixed percentage or number of hours worked and documented using a timesheet for each person a month. Number 2, external experts or consultants. For personnel under consultant contracts, including working days, travel, accommodation, and other costs. Expenditures on external expertise and services, for example, studies, surveys, translations, training, technical and financial expertise, etc., must be clearly linked to the project and be essential for its effective execution. The tendering procedure shall adhere to national public procurement laws. Number 3, travel costs and expenses, transportation costs. These can only be included for employed staff of the applicant/ASP and must be clearly linked to the project and be justified by the activities carried out within the project. Project-related travelling costs of staff employed may include air tickets, including costs for carbon offsetting, bus, train, local transportation, as well as travel and car insurance, fuel, tolls, parking fees at the event or airport, taxi costs and car rental, as well as accommodation and visa costs and daily allowances. Slide 5. Training costs. The budget line shall not be used according to the new regulations of FGA. Please keep this empty. Procurement of goods, including material goods, equipment following the rules of public procurement, or tender processes applied by the applicant/ASP. Purchase or rental of equipment costs are eligible in case it is necessary for the execution of the project and exclusively used for it. Examples might be office equipment, IT hard and software, furniture, tools or devices, or other specific equipment. Number 6, other direct costs or consumables. Initial or operating costs exclusively used for the implementation of the project. This includes office rent, ancillary costs, office consumables, ink cartridges, paper, etc. Subtotal of your direct costs, including number 7, administrative/supporting costs related to the project execution can be paid on a lump sum basis as a fixed percentage from the total of direct costs. No further justification or supporting documents are needed. Number 8, forwarding of funds. A separate budget needs to be provided for each sub-grantee separately. The grant total is the estimated volume of contract. Slide 6. Here you can see the DPP budget template itself. We've included formulas and drop-down menus so that it makes the calculation very easy. These don't change the formulas. The logic applied throughout the entire annex is simple. You describe the item as a part of a given budget line. In our case, it would be a title of a position that a staff member employed by the applicant occupies or will occupy. Afterwards, you enter a quantity in the first column, for example, the number of people working on this position. You select a unit as applicable, for example, person. You enter another quantity. In our example, it would be a number of days or months that a person will be working for a project's DPP. And finally, you provide the cost in euro per unit from the previous column, which is a day or month of work. The total funding for this specific budget item will calculate automatically in the red field. Slide 7. As we've already mentioned, the same logic applies to all budget lines. You can see that in case of procuring external expertise, you're only required to include the quantity of contracts and contract values. It can be individual contract with an external expert or a contract for development of a certain product, such as study. You don't need to break the costs down, but please make sure to include a meaningful description or title for each contract. As a reminder, please keep the line with training costs empty as far as possible. In order to avoid counting or double counting the training costs, these must be disaggregated as costs for external experts, procurement of goods, and/or other costs. Slide 8. When filling in the line on administrative costs, Please only enter the value as a percentage in the first column. All other values will calculate automatically. In case of forwarding of funds, you will need to firstly fill out a respective sheet in the budget template in the same manner as you do as an applicant. As soon as all values are included and calculated, the total value of funds forwarded to a sub-grantee will appear automatically in the main budget sheet. At the end of the template, in a dark green cell of the main budget sheet, you find the item titled Grand Total DPP, which would show the final total volume of your DPP budget. We would advise you to double-check all values to avoid any mistakes. With that, we conclude our brief presentation of Annex 4B, DPP Budget. Let's move on to Annex 5A and 5B, Business Case and Financial Mechanism. Annexes 5A and 5B, Business Case and Financial Mechanism. Annexes 5A and 5B are highly important annexes where it is possible to provide detailed information about the financial mechanisms and business case for the mitigation technology or practice that your project intends to promote. As part of these annexes, both qualitative and quantitative descriptions of the financial mechanisms are to be provided. Before you start filling out the annexes, we recommend you to carefully read the instructions and glossary at the beginning of Annex 5. Slide 2. Let's then start with Annex 5A, which is divided into 3 main sections where you will describe the main features of the technologies, the existing financing situation, and elaborate on the proposed financial mechanisms. Be aware that the totality of the annex will not be shown here today, but only a group of selected sections. Slide 3. In the first section, you are asked to provide a description of the business as usual technology or practice and of the mitigation technology or practice to be promoted by your project. In addition, you are required to provide information such as capital and operational costs, lifetime of the technology or practice, availability in the local market, and key technical features for your project. Please keep in mind that this information is to be provided for all mitigation technologies or practices supported in the project. Slide 4. In the second section of Annex 5A, you will describe the current financing parameters for the investor and end user. You will start by providing a profile of the investor, using information such as the most common sources of financing for the project, the availability of financing for BAU and mitigation technologies or practices from any financial institution, and a list of current market barriers or failures to be addressed in relation to the investor, among others. This information is to be provided for all investors to be supported in the project. Furthermore, if the end user happens to be different from the investor, you will have to describe how the end user participates in the business case. For example, does the end user pay fees for transport or energy, or do they receive savings from more energy efficient appliances? For end users, you are also asked to describe the effect that their behavior has on the business case. For example, will the business case suffer if the end user fails to pay electricity fees? In this section of the annex, you will also elaborate on the barriers that end users face that prevent them from using the mitigation technology or practice, including those barriers resulting from gender-based inequalities and/or practices of social exclusion. At the end of this section, you are asked to provide quantitative data on the average income of the end user and the maximum fee an end user can afford or be willing to pay for the service provided through the mitigation technology. For example, fees for public transport, for electricity, or the like. When possible, provide this information disaggregated by gender. Financial mechanism. Slide 1. The proposed financial support mechanisms that have been selected based on the market barriers identified in the previous sections are to be described in the final part of Annex 5A. Here you must state for each financial mechanism that your project is going to establish, it can also be only one financial mechanism, how much of the Mitigation Action Facility funding will be allocated to it, the amount of co-financing expected, which institution will host and operate it, and whether this institution already exists or not. In the template, there are already 3 types of financial mechanisms specified: loan, guarantee fund, and grant or subsidy. Additionally, there is space to add the relevant information for any other type of mechanisms that your project proposes. If you're proposing to support more than one financial mechanism, you shall provide the requested information for all the supported mechanisms. Now, let's see the type of information that you will be asked to provide for each type of mechanism. Slide 2. If your project is proposing loans to support the investing into mitigation technologies or practices, you are asked to provide information such as the lifetime in months of the fund providing the loans to the investors, as well as the expected distribution of debt and equity needed to complete the investment. For example, a split of 30% equity and 70% debt. Additionally, you will need to specify key information of the characteristics of the loan, such as its tenor, grace period, if needed, the interest rate to be offered to the investor, the currency in which the loan will be available, and assumed default rate, among others. In the case of loans, you are also required to indicate how the financing conditions align with the yield, incomes, or saving from investing in the mitigation technology or practice. For example, when is the investment taking place? When should the investment be paid back? Or when are the revenues to be received? This alignment can be supported by a cash flow analysis as part of Annex 5B, which will be covered in more detail later. Financial mechanism, slide 3. For applicants proposing to support guarantee funds, it is required to specify what is going to be covered by the guarantee. For example, the repayment of servicing of a loan or purchase power agreement by utility, and the level of coverage to be offered by the guarantee. Moreover, the period of the investment covered by the guarantee is to be specified. For example, the tenor of a loan being guaranteed. In the case of guarantees, you are asked to provide information on the banking sector, such as the level of liquidity exemplified by loan-to-deposit ratios and market information, such as number of commercial banks active on the market, commercial guarantee schemes available on the market, and any other information that helps describe the level of maturity of the financial market. Furthermore, additional information such as the proposed distribution of risk, assumed default rate, and inflows into the guarantee fund, such as guarantee funds or interest on invested capital, must be provided. As it was the case for loans, a financial model of the proposed guarantee fund shall be attached as a supplement to Annex 5A. Slide 4. Moving on to grants, the last mechanism already provided in the template. Here, you are asked to specify the level of coverage as a percentage of the total investment costs that the grant will provide, and the maximum level that said coverage is expected to reach. Additionally, the type of grant or subsidy offered and the point in time in which it will be awarded are to be specified. As it was the case with loans, you are asked to indicate how the grant aligns with the cash flow of the investment. Slide 5. After providing information for each financial support mechanism, you are asked to explain the choosing of the mechanisms and how they are suited to address the market barriers and failures identified before. Similarly, if other alternative mechanisms have been considered, make sure to elaborate on the reasons why they were found to be less appropriate and provide a list of the instruments. Please try not to repeat the information already provided in the outline, but use this space for additional specifications and details that could not be included in the outline itself. In this last section, Annex 5A, you are also asked to elaborate on how the investor will access the financial support mechanism. For example, through a local bank or microfinance institution. Last but not least, an explanation on how the financial mechanism will be phased out is to be presented for each of the supported mechanisms. At the end of Annex 5A, you will find a table where you may list all additional documents supplementing Annexes 5A and 5B, such as market studies, business models, or cash flow analysis. Remember to add verifiable sources for the information provided, particularly for quantitative data. Next, let us briefly discuss Annex 5B. Annex 5B. Annex 5B allows you to showcase the calculations behind the project's business case and financial mechanism. Submission of this annex is mandatory. Although the Mitigation Action Facility offers a template to present the different scenarios of the business case, its usage is optional, and applicants are free to submit their own MS Excel spreadsheet showcasing the calculations for various business case scenarios. Independently from the template you decide to use, make sure to use formulas instead of hard-coded numbers to allow for transparency and verification of your calculations. Please also make sure to use the same values as indicated in Annex 5A. In Annex 5B, you are asked to present a model of the payback under the business as usual scenario and a model of the new payback period under the project scenario, including a sensitivity analysis. Be aware that all models presented should be accompanied by a brief description and clear comparisons of key values such as capital cost of investment and interest rate. Before we close this topic, in relation to both Annex 5A and 5B, we want to encourage you to keep your answers as concise as possible, avoid repetitions, provide verifiable sources of information, particularly for quantitative data. Provide values in euro, and in the case of Annex 5B, use formulas instead of hard-coded data. This brings us to the end of our talk on Annexes 5A and 5B, as well as to the end of this webinar. Thank you for listening in. If you have questions, do not hesitate to contact us under contact@mitigation-action.org. We will make sure to include your questions in the upcoming rounds of clarifications. Clarification notes number 2 will be published on 4th of December. If you want your question to be included, please make sure to submit it to the TSU by the 29th of November at the end of the day. The very last round of clarifications will then apply to questions submitted between 30th November and the 10th of December and will be published on the 13th of December. Thank you and good luck in the process of outline development.